conquest of space was a grim, politically inspired race between the Soviets and the Americans. Behind the Iron Curtain, men were rushed through extreme training to get ready for life in space. Americans built rocket after rocket. The test program had many setbacks, and many of the rockets didn't get far off the pad. In Russia, the men the space race killed were usually celebrated and buried with honor. Many of them in Red Square. Men like Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, became internationally famous. But the first cosmonaut to die isn't amongst them. His death was a secret, kept for 40 years. It happened in 1961, when Valentin Bondarenko was 24 and a rising star in the Russian space program. He just got married and had a young daughter. He and his wife shared the dream that he'd be the first man in space. Bondarenko had only a few days to go before finishing his training. He faced one final test, but it was the one the trainee cosmonauts feared the most. 15 days sealed inside an isolation chamber, pressurized with oxygen. Trial by chamber was designed to weed out the men who couldn't endure the long confinement of space travel. Few cosmonauts who went into the chamber came out unscathed. Bondarenko was doing well enough, though, until the 10th day, when something went horribly wrong. A fire started, and with an atmosphere of pure oxygen, the isolation chamber rapidly became a furnace. Bondarenko was taken out alive and secretly rushed to a nearby hospital, but there was little the doctors could do.
I took his blanket very carefully from him. Then I saw completely burned out body, which I never have seen in my life before and after that. There was no skin. He didn't have hair. He didn't have even eyes.
Within hours, the first casualty of the space race was not only dead, but officially never existed.
We knew that better to keep our mouth, shut, not to open it to tell some kind of state secrets.
And Bondarenko's death stayed secret for 40 years, until 1986, when the Soviets finally admitted to the tragedy, and space historian Asif Siddiqui was able to piece together the tragic chain of events.
He had some electrodes attached to his body, and he was removing the electrodes, which were designed to monitor his physiological reactions. He used a swab of cotton to wipe residue off his body, and one of those cotton things, he inadvertently threw it away, but it landed on a hot plate, which was designed for him to prepare food. Because it's a pure oxygen atmosphere, a spark occurred, and it just flared up into a big, huge fire.
Valentin Bondarenko was killed by a tiny mistake, the kind everyone makes. But in a pure oxygen atmosphere, it was fatal. The accident, understandably, made Russian space engineers almost phobic about the gas.
I don't think they ever really psychologically overcame this sort of fear of oxygen and disaster and fire for a long time.
If there had been international scientific openness instead of Cold War competition, this burnt-out space capsule might have taken 3 astronauts into orbit instead of to their graves. This is Apollo 1, where the Americans independently learnt their lesson about the dangers of pure oxygen. The story of that tragedy began on a cold January morning in 1967, when 3 astronauts walked out to face the cameras before beginning tests on their new space capsule. They were Ed White, Roger Chaffee, and one of the heroes of the American space program, Gus Grissom.
Do you ever think of the fact that you can get killed flying spacecraft?
Oh, we recognize that we can get killed flying spacecraft, like we can get killed flying T-33s or T-38s or driving my Corvette. It's just one of the facts of life for everyone. But we have a job that is very fascinating and we're very interested in, and it's worth the risk.
Gus Grissom was first in line, it was said, for the moon. Instead, his wife Betty only has memories of a disaster.
Well, he'd been told he was going to be the first one on the moon. And, of course, he was pleased with that because that's what they all wanted to hear. Of course, that didn't make that one.
It was just after noon on that terrible day when Grissom led Chaffee and White to the launch tower, where the capsule was waiting.
I was a 12-year-old boy who was a big fan of spaceflight, and for some reason I decided that Gus Grissom was my favorite astronaut.
Once the men were inside, the capsule would be pressurized with pure oxygen, creating the same conditions as the Russian isolation chamber. This would be the last time anyone saw the three men alive. The day was already going badly. Communications between Mission Control and the capsule kept breaking down.
Say again, please.
At one point, Grissom made his famous remark about how are we going to talk to somebody on the moon if we can't talk between 2 or 3 buildings here at the Cape.
Say again, please.
There was great confusion on the intercom loops. I was listening to the test conductor. I was listening to the voice loop from the astronauts inside the spacecraft.
Okay,
Shortly thereafter, then there was the call of something like fire in the spacecraft.
I thought I heard some high-pitched voices. I thought I heard somebody say, we're on fire. I thought I heard somebody say, get us out of here. I was fearful. I didn't know it was as much a Holocaust as it was.
The hatch was not designed to be opened quickly. It took 5 minutes. By then, all 3 astronauts were dead.
The Apollo 1 fire, for many people, especially for me when we heard about it, sort of brought the world to a stop. We knew riding on a rocket may have its moments, but never did we believe that that we would lose 3 of our colleagues on the ground before they even got into space.
The Apollo 1 fire was a tragedy that was, in the first case, preventable, and in the second case, should never even proceeded to the point where it needed to be prevented.
NASA was in shock and facing a barrage of criticism and wild speculation about what had happened. They launched an inquiry and soon made a horrifying discovery. Apollo 1, which everyone knew would have a pure oxygen atmosphere, had been packed with unprotected electrical cabling, surrounded by highly combustible materials.
We had the whole damn thing full of Velcro because the astronauts wanted to be able to stick things to the walls, to the console, to the everywhere, so it wouldn't be floating around. It traps all this oxygen in there, and you hit that thing with a flame, it almost literally exploded.
There's never been a full explanation of how the fire had been allowed to happen. But officially, the finger was pointed at managers who failed to manage and engineers who didn't think things through.